About 50 years ago, an astronaut returning from the moon experienced things that he couldn't find a scientific explanation for. So, with some colleagues, he launched a new science focused on the mind and how it works in the body and across space and time. It's the field of Noetics, where the tools of modern science are used to help us understand how what we think and feel affects us and the world around us. Now, this is Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments from the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon.
This is Noetic Moments, the show that explores what consciousness is, what it does, how it works, and how our lives could be much fuller if we understood it better. I am Ruth Miller, a longtime student of consciousness, cybernetics, and culture, and through this program, I'm introducing over the series some of those people whose work has defined this field of research, and I'm explaining some of their ideas and experiments. I'll also explore some relevant news items and answer questions that you send to my email address, ruth@noeticmoments.org. Now, over the course of these programs, we've learned a lot of things about consciousness. Even though the medical world defines consciousness as what we're aware of at this moment, most of what goes on in the mind is not in our conscious awareness at all, but goes on in unconscious processes. We're not aware of a lot of it. From Jung and Freud and other early researchers, we learned that our minds can be thought of as having three aspects. Our normal awareness, what we call the conscious mind. What keeps our bodies going and includes our fears and beliefs about threats and dangers, which we're calling the subconscious mind. And what connects us with our highest ideals and guides us in our actions, what we're calling the superconscious mind. We learned that we can change our state of consciousness so we're aware of different aspects of mind at different times. Then we learned that the brain modifies whatever sensory signals it receives to fit past patterns of experience, following a default network in the brain. And this means that we perceive, we see, hear, taste, and feel what we expect to experience based on the past. We also saw that our body often responds faster than nerve impulses or chemicals can travel, and before we're aware of it, before it's conscious. Some experiments have even demonstrated that a person's mind continues to perceive and process, they are conscious, for as much as several hours, even when the brain and heart are flatlined, and the person has been declared dead. And we learned that no one yet has been able to pinpoint how ideas and thoughts are formed in brain tissue. Based on all this, many scientists have come to accept that what we call mind is not the product of the electrochemical activity of the brain, but is in fact the activity of a field that surrounds and permeates the brain and the whole body. This field may be at least partly electromagnetic, because it's possible to measure electromagnetic activity for several inches around the body in what some people say is an egg shape, extending from below our knees to a few inches above our heads. Mind, then, is best understood as a field, a pattern of informed energy that exists whether the body is functioning or not, and permeates and develops with the body and the brain. The brain, then, is best understood as a receiver-transmitter, receiving messages from the mind and transmitting them to the body, and receiving messages from the organs and senses and transmitting them to the body and the mind. And we've learned over the years that this field of mind affects energy and matter in a variety of ways. The experiments in quantum physics, where the subatomic building blocks of the universe show up as energy or matter, depending on whether a mind is present to observe them. The way people's bodies and pets have been observed to change when someone they're connected with turns attention their way. The way that individuals have changed the patterns of numbers in what should be random grids on their computer screens, and the collective human mind changes the readouts from many random number generators on the network of computers run by the Global Consciousness Project. Now, every field is a unique pattern a vibration of energy and information that's different from other fields. And sometimes they vibrate along similar patterns, resonating with each other, so minds can affect each other across space and time. And we've even learned from a growing number of scientists who are seeing our individual mind as a part of a larger field, equating individual mind or mind as a whole with the quantum or zero-point field out of which all matter and energy arise. These understandings help to explain things like the law of attraction, how the world around us mirrors what our consciousness is focusing on, how we can access information in the quantum, or what some people call the Akashic field, through intuition, insight, and channeling, how dreams can affect the body and the overall consciousness of a being, how music affects both brain and body and can connect us with other fields of mind, how we can enhance or slow down healing in our bodies and sometimes in others through our thoughts, emotions, and visualizations, and how the belief in a treatment can help a patient experience healing in the placebo effect, how remote viewing and telekinesis work, how we can get into a state of flow in which the mind and the brain are in sync, maximizing our effectiveness and our experience, and how the two hemispheres of our brain are involved in the connection between brain and mind. You can catch up on our past shows on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where you'll also find links to the clips, books, and authors that I mention. Well, this is a show about consciousness, and we've been looking at various models of what consciousness is and does, and we've talked a lot about how mind and brain interface and how the neurophysiology of this system works, but we haven't talked much about the psychology and the psychological theories that have emerged, particularly in the last 20, 30 years. According to a website that Psychology Today puts out, psychologytoday.com, they're saying that prior to the 1990s, quote, theories of consciousness were more of a philosophical pursuit than a serious scientific one. They say this was largely because scientists considered the domain of subjective experience, which is, they say, what consciousness fundamentally is, to be, well, too subjective. It just didn't seem amenable to the objective empirical study using the scientific method. The author here is concerned because a lot of criticism can be and has been placed on consciousness studies research. Things like the topic of consciousness has attracted a huge number of mystical woo-woo practitioners. And then he says, but if even 99% of the field were comprised of pseudoscience, the large, vibrant scientific community it represents would certainly be the other 1%. The issue, of course, is that most of the hard scientists of this world are concerned about causation rather than correlation. And it's very hard to look at causation when we're looking at consciousness. We can talk a lot about correlation. We've talked in this program about how the neural activities in different parts of the brain are correlated with certain experiences. But we have not yet seen any causation from the neural activities of the brain. So there's been a lot of theories. In fact, there are 4 major theories right now, contenders, if you will, for theories of consciousness. And one is called HOT. These are the HOTs. And they propose that thoughts become conscious when basic perceptions become re-represented as higher-order representations at higher levels of the brain, particularly when it enters the prefrontal cortex. HOT, higher-order theories, are based on the notion that once we get into the frontal cortex, then consciousness happens. Well, our experience has shown that that may not be the case, but it is a working theory that people are testing. The second group of theories is called global workspace theories. These theories suggest that perceptions and thoughts and emotions become conscious when they gain access to a, quote, workspace, when they make it into the awareness of the person involved. Some people call it the spotlight. So consciousness occurs when all these random things come together, are focalized, and the person becomes aware of them. Now, this gets back to that old idea that consciousness is being aware of what's happening in the moment. The next one is actually the reason I'm doing this show today. A number of articles have come out, and in fact, this site, psychologytoday.com, was just updated a week or so ago. And a number of articles are coming out talking about something called integrated information theory. Now, this theory talks about how the different parts of a brain interact to create a unified experience. The idea is that consciousness is related to how much information is integrated among the different parts of the brain. In fact, this is perhaps the oldest of the theories of consciousness, because the assumption is the more connections that you've got, the more likely you're going to have consciousness. That is self-awareness, as they are defining it in the neurosciences. So the integrated information theory suggests that not just brains, but any complex system with the right level of interconnectedness and integration of information could exhibit conscious awareness, self-awareness. And this is the kind of theory that is supporting the belief among many scientists that it's possible to develop an artificial system that is so complex that it becomes self-aware without having to be as complex as the human brain. The IIT theories, or the integrated information theory, attempts to explain qualities of the conscious experience, saying that the unique pattern of relationships determines the quality. Now, there's another group of theories, and these are related to the processing that goes on in what is called top-down signaling. These theories fall under the category of reentry and predictive processing theories. All right, so they're saying that conscious mental states, that is, we become aware in the moment when top-down signals are sent from the higher level brain regions, the cortex, and they send information, expectations, and context to lower level brain regions. And this communication then shapes how the brain perceives and interprets the information it's receiving through the sense organs. So self-awareness, according to this, happens because the frontal cortex, the upper parts of the brain, are telling the sense organs a context for what's happening. Now, there are other approaches that have been out there, and one is related to attention. Where is our attention? That is where our consciousness is. Another one is related to unlimited associative learning. And this one is interesting because it kind of describes the evolutionary development of self-awareness. We're constantly associating our sensory inputs in new patterns, and at some point, those patterns become a definition of self in the world. There are other learning-based theories that often relate to these other theories that we've talked about that have to do with the relationship between the kinds of things going on in the upper cortex and the kinds of things going on in the lower parts of the brain. Other theories go beyond. They address things like the relationship between our normal routines and our inner maps. Some explore the ways we feel and our predictive processing based on our feelings, our affect. For some, for example, the brain predicts what the body's blood glucose level should be and then sends signals to adjust that state based on past patterns. Some feeling-based theories or affect-based theories consider various cortical mechanisms to be unnecessary in the functioning of human consciousness. There's a number of ways of looking at how the brain and the mind and the body interact, and most of them don't even consider the possibility of what we have discovered so far, that brain and mind are two different things. Still, it's a fascinating world in which lots of people are developing lots of new ideas. Some of them will be helpful in the future. So I just thought you might be interested that there are a lot of theories developing in this field that we call consciousness research. Isn't that cool? If you just tuned in, you are listening to Noetic Moments, the radio show exploring what consciousness is, how it works, and how our lives can be greatly enhanced as we understand it more fully. I'm Ruth Miller, your host, and that sound tells me it's time to look at a book. Answer any questions you email to me at ruth@noeticmoments.org. And maybe take a look at what's going on in the news that can help us understand the role consciousness plays in our experience. Now, the book that I want to explore with you today is a much older work than that article. Obviously, he wasn't looking from a systems perspective or any of the other kinds of perspectives that I've been working from. He was looking almost completely in the realm of psychology and neuropsychology. The book I want to talk to you about today is neither. It's called Autopoesis and Cognition, the Realization of the Living. It came out in 1980, and it's the result or the efforts of two Chilean scholars who were working with some cyberneticians from Europe and the U.S. when Allende was the head of the government in Chile, to look at how an economy might be built in Chile that would be particularly supportive of people, nature, and other kinds of systems going on in the Chilean region. These two people are called Umberto Maturana and Francisco Varela. And these two just broke the ceiling in theory at the time. People were puzzled by their work. They were intrigued by their work. The men that they had worked with in cybernetics were totally supportive of their work because they were seeing the relationship between all of the interconnected aspects of any living system and the tendency of every living system to create itself over and over again in new ways. It was considered at the time a work of systems theory because that's who the sponsors were for this work. And there were some metaphysicians who went, yes, this is very much what we have in mind. It was an idea that was intriguing to many. Now, auto, A-U-T-O, means self. And poesis, which is spelled P-O-I-E-S-I-S, is creating. So these are self-creating systems. So in many ways, we can say an embryo becoming a child is a self-creating system, yes? A set of elements working together to accomplish a purpose, which is the fundamental system. But we generally think of systems as having all kinds of feedback loops and all kinds of subsystems working together to accomplish that purpose. Many of us were working with Maturana and Varela's work. We were seeing, well, not only is an individual living being an autopoetic system, but so are organizations, so are families, so are just about every time a group of living systems comes together, creating themselves into another system. That's kind of the nature of them. We construct our interactive structures, and we provide and create feedback loops within those structures. We provide controlling information loops as well as processing loops and all kinds of good things. So living systems are almost by definition autopoetic systems. And what Varela and Maturana did is they went, yeah, and there has to be awareness at some level in order for choices to be made. And they were suggesting that the act of choosing is an act of cognition. And whenever we choose, any form of system chooses to move right or left, or up or down in the case of single-celled animals, or plants in some cases, or chooses to move very quickly or move very slowly, any number of things like that at the very simplest levels. And we choose all kinds of things at some pretty complex levels, and we are constantly self-creating. So cognition is fundamental to the structuring of any living system, which means that some kind of thought process is happening. I quoted a while back one of my favorite physics authors, a woman named Dana Zohar, in her book, The Quantum Self, where she talks about the fact that subatomic particles may become matter or energy depending on whether an observer is present, is suggesting that they are choosing at that level of being. And then if we look at quantum mechanics professor Amit Goswami's work on the self-aware universe, he is saying it is not possible for there to be a universe without self-awareness. Therefore, it's not possible to be part of a universe without self-awareness at some level. And this is the essence of Autopoesis and Cognition by Umberto Maturana and Francisco Varela. Published originally in Chile, and then later in this country under Reidel, R-E-I-D-E-L Publishing Company in 1980. Marvelous work and a tremendous contributor to the theory of consciousness, even though psychologists don't appear to understand that it's been going on all this time. On the other hand, that wonderful article that I was reading is pretty consistent with what folks are thinking and saying in the traditional sciences today. So you have the full range there from off the charts to the norm. There's some other useful books if you're wanting to look at information about the theory of consciousness. One of them is Jay Anderson's The Architecture of Cognition from Harvard University Press. Another one is very early on, The Materialist Theory of Mind. That's from London. That's another Armstrong. And then there's Baer's Cognitive Theory of Consciousness. Owen Baines, The Unity of Consciousness. All of that's out of England, which I think is marvelous. The U.S. was way behind thinking on these things. And then we begin to get past space and self, and we begin to get The Engine of Reason and The Seat of the Soul by Churchland. He's a marvelous writer. You can read that one pretty easily. Brainstorms by Dennett. Oh, all the work by Dennett. D.C. Dennett, a lot of good stuff. Freedom Evolves in 2003 was a marvelous book. So there are books out there that address the theory of what consciousness is from a psychological perspective. And I thought you might enjoy hearing about some of those. Before we quit, I can't ignore the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, another online resource, and their section on consciousness is very, very helpful because of the way they categorize them. In the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, consciousness is talked about as having several approaches. The first is the descriptive issue. What is the structure and the organization of the experience we call consciousness? And then why does consciousness exist? What is the function of it? And then the causal state and informational access. All those good things. And then it gets into the theories of consciousness, talking about metaphysical and dualist and quantum theories, and the discussion is marvelous. So if you want to go online, you can find the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy under consciousness, and I'll read their conclusion as the conclusion of today's show. A comprehensive understanding of consciousness will likely require theories of many types. One might usefully and without contradiction accept a diversity of models that each, in their own way, aim respectively to explain the physical, neural, cognitive, functional, representational, and higher-order aspects of consciousness. There is unlikely to be any single theoretical perspective that suffices for explaining all the features of consciousness that anyone would wish to understand. Thus, a synthetic and pluralistic approach may provide the best road to future progress. Yes. Well, that's it for today's show. We are out of time for today, but remember, you can continue the exploration on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where there are links to archived past shows, along with the titles and other resources we refer to on the show, and where you can send me your comments and questions, which I'll do my best to get answered the next time we're on the air. For now, thanks for joining me here on Noetic Moments. Recorded at the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon, and have a wonderful week.
You've been listening to Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments. This program is produced in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in beautiful Florence, Oregon, supported by you, our listeners. Our theme music is Tumbling Planets, composed and performed by Jeff Lovejoy. To hear this program again or learn more about Noetic sciences, search our website, www.noeticmoments.org.